What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long, long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone, and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
On this episode of Educate Everyone, we continue our conversation with Dr. Pedro Noguera. He's the Emory Stoops and Joyce King Stoops Dean of the USC Rossier School of Education and a distinguished professor of education. A leading sociologist, he studies how social and economic conditions shape schools and student outcomes. Now here's Dr. Atman with Dr. Noguera.
I know we're focused on education. As I said at the beginning, I have been in this field for a long time, and I continue to see it as the best avenue we have for creating a more just and fair society. But part of that means that we've got to advocate for those who don't have the ability to do so for themselves and whose rights are not being acknowledged. And until we see it that it's in our national interest to educate all kids, it's not going to happen.
I couldn't agree more. I wouldn't have founded a nonprofit to try and do exactly that in so many different ways and degrees, and ways and degrees that I had never conceived of when I initially set out to do the work we do. That being said, what would exactly be the pathway towards doing that? More opportunity. Great. What does that look like? You said before about, obviously we can't have the onus completely beyond the educational system. Totally agree. So what does that then look like? You mentioned, this program in Harlem. Again, why doesn't that work on a larger scale? So what's the blueprint? If you could wave a magic wand, what is it that you would be able to implement yourself through that waving that would get us on a step-by-step pathway towards being able to do all the things that I think all of us really do want to see happen, but for some reason are not?
Well, I don't think there's a magic wand that could do it. The Harlem Children's Zone that I mentioned before, it works well because it's funded by private equity and by philanthropy. And Jeffrey Canada, who founded it, is a great fundraiser, and he has support from banks like Goldman Sachs and others. How do you replicate that? I don't know. It's a shame that we have to rely on philanthropy, even though there's a lot of wealthy people in this country. So I don't know if there's any simple solution to this problem. It's tied up in our history, and it's complicated by our economy and by our politics. I think we can learn a lot from other countries. I've mentioned Canada several times. I've spent time in New Zealand. I was in Singapore just a month ago. Singapore, we can learn so much. Singapore has no resources at all, and they have one of the best education systems in the world. Of course, a tiny place. But, it's ironic that there are many countries with fewer resources than us who have figured out how to educate kids. This is an American problem. I'll give you one example. I was in Barbados, a small Caribbean island, a few years ago. My family's background is from the Caribbean. Many Barbadian students will apply to colleges in the United States or England to go to university. And these kids had signed up to take the SAT. And the average score was just over 1,200. This is a time when 1,600 was the highest possible score. Mm-hmm. Now, the papers in Barbados were saying, how come more kids from Barbados didn't get perfect scores? That was their reaction. I said, how many communities in this country would you have kids who are poor and black who are averaging 1,200 on the SAT as they were in Barbados? Somehow being poor and black is not an obstacle to being a high achiever. In this country, we assume something's wrong with the child rather than saying, what's wrong with this picture? Why are some of these kids not thriving and not succeeding? And we are more comfortable blaming people for their problems than being problem solvers and figuring out what we could do to ensure that educational opportunities are available to all kids.
So what's the solution? Because again, we can all agree that it's a problem, but I think we need more tangible solutions. And yes, it's a shame that a lot of that are successful that seem to do have a blueprint require private equity or some large funding source behind it. And I suppose that could be something that a government program by and large takes on more. But again, I feel like we do have a lot of government programs that already help the educational system. So there's something else. And maybe it does go back to an ideology or a mindset or a mentality that we have. So again, like, what's the difference between how Singapore is able to do it and how it happens in the United States? Canada is closely related. So how come they can figure it out and the United States does not?
I think it's, again, will and priorities. For example, Singapore has no natural resources. They don't even have their own water. They have to pump water in from Malaysia, but they recycle 100% of the water they have. And education is a priority from preschool all the way through the university. So they are one of the top performing nations in the world in education. But what's also interesting, 75% of the people in Singapore live in public housing. And this is the second wealthiest nation in the world because public housing in Singapore is excellent. Everybody wants it. Just because it's public housing doesn't mean it has to be crappy. So again, it's about priorities, it's about values, and it's about our commitments. And when those things come together, we can demonstrate what it takes to use education to lift people out of poverty so they can help themselves. That's the key. I'm not talking about handouts. I'm talking about giving people the tools so they can help themselves and help their families. That's what I have been able to do in my own family and my siblings. And I know many others who have been able to do the same thing. But the question is, why aren't we doing that at a larger scale? Why aren't we able to use education as a resource to really create a more equitable society, a society where we don't have to see people living on our streets as we do today?
And so what do you think, Dr. Noguera, the mentality here domestically is that sort of drives the action? And then the action, of course, begets, the policy, which begets all the difficulties that we've been talking about here today. And you said it's priorities. But again, priorities are driven by a notion, by an idea, by a concept that an individual, or in this case, a society has. So what do you think the founding and driving, motivating ideologies are that are basically underwriting that system that we see as something that's not living up to what it could be so far as education is concerned within this country?
I think that what we've got to do a better job of is pointing to examples of success. That's the reason why I gave the Harlem Children's Zone. I could give many others that show us that when you put the supports in place, you can change outcomes for young people and you can improve their lives and that of their families. Because I think that in the absence of that, we are more likely to blame kids, blame their families for their problems, instead of asking, why are there so many people like this? What's going on here? That's why I pointed out, for example, Canada has no ghettos. Why not? Why don't we say, what are they doing differently? How is it possible that when you go into a black community in Windsor, Ontario, you see nice middle-class homes, parks, the kinds of things you would expect anywhere. You don't see dilapidated buildings and liquor stores and gun shops and pawn shops all over the place, as you do in most urban areas in this country. So I think it's asking a different set of questions about the factors that produce success. And if we focus on that, we'll end up with very different policies than we have now. Policies that promote opportunity rather than blaming families or keeping people in their place, keeping them poor, keeping them struggling, which is what our policies do right now.
But again, these come from someplace. It comes from an idea about something. We clearly must have, and I don't know, I've never been to Singapore. It's been a while since I've been to Canada. And there's something that underwrites all action, every action. Every action that we take is underwritten by some sort of idea. So how do we come to change people's ideas? Because it sounds like this has to be something that has to occur on a societal level. And again, I'm not even sure that I still understand how Canada is able to not have the kind of projects that American cities so readily have and seem to be growing more and more by the day. There's got to be a mentality. Is it the way that we present the idea about what it is to be an American here? Is it our interaction or the way that capitalism is unfolding within this country? And you said everything starts within the educational system. I couldn't agree more with that. So again, what has to happen? What has to change within both our ideology and then the practical, pragmatic praxis of how we go about just in general, the implementation of all these lauded and lofty and great ideas that we're talking about, but that practicality in that application is obviously the large gulf between where we want to be and where we are.
Well, if you look at our history, the New Deal under FDR was designed to ensure that we had social security system, for example, so that elderly people who were no longer working didn't just starve and they could be supported, and that we were taking care of those in need. We went further during the civil rights movement, extending opportunities like Title I that I mentioned before to poor kids. We have to continue to do that. I point out often that when Henry Ford, the great auto manufacturer, he designed houses and built houses for his workers in Detroit that were close to their jobs, because he said, my workers need housing. They need to be able to have enough money to be able to buy the cars they produce. We have tech companies right here in California that make billions of dollars and still pay their workers. I'm talking about the security workers, the cafeteria workers, barely enough to live on. Why? Why treat people that way? When it's clearly not about money, they have plenty of money. There's a heartlessness there that is, I think, disturbing, and we need to speak up about it, because there's really no reason why we should have the challenges we face as a nation, given the great wealth and the educational resources we have in our country.
Yeah, and I don't disagree that there's a heartlessness about a lot of the things that we as both society and as individuals just ooze sometimes from time to time. So, but I think, again, we're kind of getting closer to maybe the issue at hand is, so where does that heartlessness come from? I think from on the individual aspect, or on that level, I should say, there's something primal and instinctual about survival just in general. But that's kind of the beauty of society, right? Is that we can band together and sort of tame the wilds, both interior to all of us and what we face exteriorly on a daily basis. And I think this kind of loops back to my question before about everything comes from an idea, a concept, a notion about something is. So where in your mind does heartlessness, as you've described it, come from? Because I think you're right. There's got to be more compassion in order for a lot of these problems to be solved. So how do we get closer to being a more compassionate society? How do we get rid of and carve out that heartlessness that you described?
Well, I think it takes leadership, but it also takes movements. The Great Depression, a lot of people were suffering in this country, and there were movements. There were labor movements that were demanding a change. Civil rights movement did the same thing. So when there are movements from below, when the people say, hey, this is a priority, I think we're going to see that around healthcare. If they don't do something to address the fact that millions of people may lose health insurance, I think we're going to start to see people protesting about this, because healthcare should not be a luxury. All of us have health needs that need to be met. And I think the same is true on education. We need to recognize that even when we don't have children, or even if our children are being well served, we should be as concerned about other people's children. Because if they're not getting a good education, those are the people who become our criminals. Those are the people who become dependent on our society because they don't have the means or the wherewithal to take care of themselves. So it's really about looking at our collective interest, not simply thinking that I'm going to just look out for myself. And again, most other countries are doing this, and so there's no reason why we couldn't too. But in the absence of political leadership that's charting this kind of course, then I think we're going to need more of effort coming from below, from ordinary people, to raise these issues and to insist. That's why I think the election of Madami is important. I just hope that it's not just a good campaign and results in real change in New York City, my hometown.
That's yet to be seen. A lot of the things that he's proposing have failed miserably in the past. Here, some have worked in other places, as you mentioned. But I think that, again, that maybe goes back to a mentality. And I don't know that a politician is going to solve it for anyone at this point. I think it goes, like you said, far beyond that probably. And again, just looking at your own background, as we've already mentioned a couple of times now, you came from maybe what some would consider a very difficult and destitute place. And not only were you able to rise up out of that, but so were your siblings who were in the exact same circumstance. So I do think that it has to really start with stronger family ties, most likely, or family connections, because all of this stuff really starts at home. You get your morals, your values, who you are as a human being comes from your actual and exact roots. And no mayor, no president is going to instill that in people, no matter how many programs, no matter how many opportunities that avail themselves to people, is that if you don't have a strong center, if you don't have that gravitational force within you that sort of allows for you to be stationary and understand where you're at, what you're looking at, what you need to do, how you can best serve not only yourself, but your community, and all the benefits that can be reaped by you doing that. If you don't understand what that means or how to go about making those connections, again, there's no politician, no program out there that's going to be able to just swoop in and solve those issues for you or any of us. So I think a lot of that, again, starts at home. I think a lot of it starts with a recognition that there has to be more spirituality involved in people's daily lives in whatever form that looks like, because I think spirituality centers people towards the exact mindset that I just described. And that is, I think, by and large, severely lacking amongst people and society in the modern era. And then you combine those centering things, those compasses, combine that with the opportunity that we've been talking about here. And then I think you start to build something. I think that you also have to just make sure that people are aware of the issues that are surrounding them. And I think in this age of, it's not just information, it's saturation and oversaturation of information. And nobody knows really almost what to believe because there's so much information out there. And I don't know whether it's good or bad that just a few short years ago, we only had a few streams of information that gave us the narrative on a number of things, or now that we have so much that we don't know what to believe. I tend to think that the latter is certainly better, so you can at least dissect things and make your own decisions. That being said, I think that we still have to make sure that people are aware of the information out there so far as what these problems that we're all facing actually are. And again, I think we have to give people a real purpose, because I'm not sure that we've instilled that enough within folks. And how we go about doing that, I think, is really the conversation from here. And I do think it's a combination of what happens at home, what happens within your own self, within your own spirit, within your own mind, and then having the opportunity afforded to people to go out and make a difference. And again, to become aware of these problems and then to go and tackle them with the full knowledge about what they think that they can do in order to combat some of these things. And exactly how, again, we go about instilling some of those ideas and getting people prepared and making sure that people on a ground level have access to so many of the things that we're talking about here today. We need to get to a practical place, because ideas are wonderful, but we need exact measures and we need to put things in practice that match the ideal. And so again, I think that's where the conversation needs to head in general.
I don't agree with you on a number of things you just said. I'm at USC. It's a beautiful campus. Many of our students come from very wealthy backgrounds. Many of them don't have a sense of purpose. They're here because they were good students, perhaps, and their parents can afford the high tuition it costs to go here. They drink a lot on the weekends. They go to football games. The fact that they might do things that are irresponsible does not result in them ending up on our streets, because they have families that have the ability to pick them up again and make sure they go to rehab or make sure that they get back on track. That does not happen for lots of other people who don't have resources, right?
Sure.
Poor kids who were like me, need more education because they don't have the support system. And if we invest in educating them, we could do a lot to create fewer social problems than we have right now in our country. But again, I said it before, I think it's a question of generating the will to see that this is wise investment. It's better to educate kids than to spend money incarcerating people.
Couldn't agree with you more on that and so many other things that we've been talking about here today. So thank you, Dr. Noguera. Where can people find more out about you and your work?
You can look me up, Google me. I'm here at USC as the dean, and you can see a lot of the things I've written online. I talk about this in my presentations as well that are also available online.
Excellent. Again, Dr. Noguera, thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you so much for this conversation. I think a lot of the things that we're talking about here today, I think a lot of that starts with just being aware that the issue is out there, and having these conversations are at least a first step towards fixing the larger issues. So thank you so much for having one here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
And now the Middle Tree Minute.
This is Kristen Hernandez, Middle Tree's executive assistant. One powerful way to check understanding is to ask your child to explain a concept as if they were teaching a 5-year-old. This is forcing them to remove fancy language and focus on the core idea. If they need to explain it simply, they truly understand it. If they struggle, it's a sign they need more practice or clarity. This strategy works for everything from math and science to history and reading comprehension. And that's the Middle Tree Minute.
And now a quick look into Dr. Atman's book, A Philosophical War. So, Joe, last time we talked about the book, we were talking about humans' originality, where that came from, how did we get to where we are? It's really an interesting concept when you sit down and think about it.
Yeah, it's central to the book itself. And it's again, kind of like the question of how did we get the kind of consciousness that we have, where we don't really entertain or really question that so much. We've just sort of arrived at a way of thinking, arrived at a way of being, arrived at a way of just being a human being in general. We don't sort of go and retrace the lineage or how it is that we got to this point. And it's something that is explored in the book. But part of that then kind of harkens back to another question, or if you dig a little deeper, it uncovers another question, which is there some sort of originality that we've sort of lost? Did we have this kind of being, this kind of, not only just a consciousness, but a kind of being in general, this original kind of human being that has lost? And what did that potentially look like? How do we even discover what that was? And you kind of have to do some thought experiments about it. We tend to think of everything in terms of physicality. And what I mean by that is we tend to think that everything has this physical element and component to it, and that takes primacy over everything that we do and experience. We're here in a physical world that moves in a linear time, and physical phenomena happens to us. A rock falls down the mountain. It creates other disruptances, on the mountainside, and then it lands somewhere and boom, right? So there's this physical aspect that we attribute to everything. My question is, are we looking at that physical nature of the world and of the universe and setting that up as the primary way by which we view the world? Is that correct? And something that we'll get way deeper into is, isn't it maybe more likely that we have to have a certain kind of consciousness in order to even experience a physical world in the way that we currently do? And if you trace back our lineage, like in a biological way, we talk in this very same vein about evolution and about how human beings evolved and became. And that's sort of the modern way of looking at things and the scientifically accepted how human beings became the kinds of beings that we are. I'm wondering, in this book and in this work, if the way that we have evolved didn't actually have more to do with our conscious structure, and the conscious structure that we had maybe previously had a different alignment with reality and actually and even had a different relationship with the physical nature and reality of the world and the universe at large in and of itself. Much in the same way that maybe an amoeba has a different physical experience than a giraffe does to the world. And you have to kind of do some thought experiments, and there's things that we'll talk about later that sort of flesh this out a little bit more. But I'm wondering what kind of consciousness that we had previously as human beings and what that relationship may have looked like, or what that may have done to the relationship that we had with the physical world in and of itself. So there's a kind of originality that we're going to explore, and a kind of being by which, and again has been totally thematic throughout these segments and the early part of the work here in A Philosophical War, that we'll continue to kind of open up and explore as we go on.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middletree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.